I'm Lauren, and I've always been the trustworthy person who gives thank you notes, remembers birthdays, and I'm 34, a small business owner, and I remain after dinner to assist clean up, stable and emotionally sound, depending on the moment. But I've always been proud of supporting my family despite their lack of merit. So when my sister Chloe got engaged last year, I immediately broke down in tears as I watched her proposal video, her absurd wedding planning binder, and even paid the down payment for her ideal location. $31,000 was wired without hesitation. My real mother responded, "You've always been like a second mom to her." Afterward, that remark would come back to bother me because I was unaware of it being. When the actual show started, I felt as though having a second mother somehow allowed me to be thrown aside like yesterday's confetti. I had swung by my parents' house on a Tuesday afternoon with a ton of wedding samples, including linen swatches and flower arrangements. Chloe was upstairs, Mom was in, and I had a bottle of champagne I had been saving for the last dress fitting. The kitchen, agitating. Something violently, without raising her gaze, she stated, "We must discuss." Her smooth yet clipped delivery instantly made my stomach turn. Put down the champagne. "What's happening?" She smiled oddly at the end. I initially laughed as she tugged at her lips. "You're not invited to the wedding." To be honest, I thought it was a joke. The week before, we had been deciding on table layouts, and I had assisted her in writing the halfway through my speech at the rehearsal dinner. I questioned, "What?" "You're not invited," she reiterated with laughter and incredulity, and this time the Chloe made the decision because she wanted it to be intimate, but she didn't smile. Only my immediate family I opened my mouth to say to claim that I was a member of her family, but I was stopped by my mother's arrogant expression. Rather than crying or screaming, You're not going to make a scene, are you?" she questioned as she stood there. As if this were just another Tuesday, I turned back to the stove and muttered, "Of course not." Peacefully savor the day. I left without saying anything more, but within something broke on the way home, and Chloe and I kept playing it over in my head. Weren't just sisters. We had been best friends throughout our childhood. I paid for her to attend her prom after her date canceled. I had even assisted her in choosing a ring for her fiancé, Jacob, after she lost her scholarship during her first semester of college. He requested my assistance, but it was all for nothing now since the wedding. When I arrived home, I sat at the table where I had been planning on my dime, but I was no longer welcome. I opened my laptop at the kitchen counter and entered the bank account I had set up especially for her wedding fund. I looked at the balance of $31,024.50 for a long time. I then returned all of the money to my own funds and sent the venue an email with the subject "Lauren Daniels, please cancel my reservation." I had originally booked it under my name. Within an hour, Andrea, the owner, replied to apologize and confirm that the deposit had been released. Would be retained, but I closed the deal with the remaining roughly $20,000 being refundable. Laptop inhaled deeply before sending a text message to the one person who truly needed to know. "Jacob, just letting you know that the location is probably no longer reserved for June 24th. Best of luck, you'll work something out." And then, silence. I assumed they would come up with another scheme and I would disappear from the story. I was trained to be a good girl, but by morning, my phone buzzed so loudly that it slipped off the nightstand. I missed 1423 SMS, 7 voicemails, and the final one came from, "I need to talk to you, Jacob Lauren. You don't comprehend what she did." At that point, I understood that although the wedding could be off, the true tale was just beginning. I had 14 missed calls and nearly twice as many texts by the time I poured my first cup of coffee. A heavy quietness had replaced the tranquil satisfaction I had experienced the previous evening. No, that wasn't the as I read through the notes. It felt more like the weight of the reality was finally falling into place. Each one was more frenzied than the last, and the majority were from Chloe. "What the devil did you do? Give me a call right away because you're spoiling everything." I urged Mom not to do it. said to you, "This is unfair," and then another that only said, "Please don't do this." I didn't reply because I wasn't prepared to sort through that jumble of blame and backtracking, but Jacob Lauren's statement that really got me was, "I don't know, please can we—" I couldn't figure out what specifically he didn't know, but the sentence resonated with me. Because the venue was reserved in my name, Chloe and Mom had chosen to exclude me. I texted back just 2 words, saying that without me, the wedding timeline would fall apart. "Call now, Lauren," he said. "I'm breathless." Nearly instantly, leaning against the phone, I pleaded, "Please don't hang up, I'm listening," as if he had just run out of a burning building. He groaned. "Look, I didn't know you weren't," in response to my voice being flatter than I felt. "Chloe told me you were busy, but I thought you were withdrawing emotionally." I almost chuckled when she mentioned that I was busy with work and didn't want to be involved anymore. Just abandoned the wedding I was organizing and funding. There was a moment before. He humbly acknowledged, "I'm a fool. You're correct to be upset, and I should have verified instead of assuming." Many people assumed that Jacob had started an apology when I interrupted. I believed the venue because it seemed practiced but not fake. It was more like he had been rehearsing it in his mind all night. Was in Chloe's name. I didn't realize it. Belonged to you. She insisted that everything was I never questioned it because it was a gift from a buddy. Did she also mention that the dress fittings, the bespoke floral arrangements, and the photographer were friends? Because those were, Jacob moaned, "Jesus, Lauren, I apologize. This is a problem with all of my contacts and my credit card." Mess, to put it mildly, I withheld what I told him, not out of resentment. Self-respect. You don't expect someone to remain silent while denying them the opportunity to contribute. After a long period of silence, he offered something unexpected. "Can I come over?" I hesitated. "Why?" "Because I believe you should know the truth about why this is happening, and because I need to tell you something face-to-face occurred that paragraph once more, and I accepted the truth against my better judgment." 20 minutes later, Jacob arrived at my apartment with the appearance of someone who hadn't slept. His tie was missing, his shirt's buttons weren't matching, and he had that expression males get when they're too stressed to act. Otherwise, he sat at the kitchen table across from me as if it were a deposition. He started by saying, You are aware that Chloe has been in a downward spiral for weeks. Your mother suggested a small wedding, but she initially desired a vineyard ceremony, everything you had planned. But then your mother began implying that you were making everything about yourself, that it was your control, your show, and I blinked as she continued. "You're overshadowing Chloe, and you're doing it to prove a point." Jacob nodded, realizing that Chloe is merely riding your coattails, and that you are the successful sister. Coattails. Your mother repeatedly insisted that Chloe needed to be independent and that this wedding was her chance to sunlight. Something within of me cracked, and she stood up on her own 2 feet after I carried Mom had watched Chloe through more storms than I could remember, and now she wanted to rewrite history. She advised Chloe to reduce everything. Jacob went on to say that if, in order to gain respect, Chloe had to cut the umbilical cord, which included there was a terrible, unreal quiet between us. "You mean that your mother gave her an ultimatum?" "She gave Chloe the impression that it was her idea, but I now know that it wasn't." Tried to take it all in as she gazed at him. The harsh reality set in like granite, Mom. Had purposefully planned my exclusion. She didn't just want me to leave the wedding. She wanted me removed. Pride controls. Jealousy. Perhaps all of the aforementioned. I looked into Jacob's eyes. So what? He paused. I stared as Chloe sobbed in her apartment, saying she didn't want a wedding. I exhaled bitterly because she simply didn't know how to repair the harm without upsetting your mother at the wedding without you. I am aware that he claimed it was too late for that, but it might not be too late for anything else. That day, when Jacob went, I sat on my couch and stared out without hurrying to meet Chloe. At the skyline, allowing the quiet to linger long, enough to feel its weight. The rage was still evident, boiling, but now it was entwined with something else, perhaps grief or the understanding that this treachery was a habit rather than an isolated incident. Yet by late afternoon, I texted. Her response was quick. "Yes, please come." I didn't anticipate crying. "You home?" Walked up the stairs of her apartment, but I only shed one or two tears and wiped them away quickly. She opened the door as if she had been there behind it the entire time before I knocked. She wore an outdated hoodie and leggings, and her eyes were swollen and streaked with mascara. Outfit of emotional breakdown. "Hey," she murmured. "Hey." She moved out of the way, and I entered the apartment, which still had dark blinds. It smelled like stress and old Thai cuisine, and takeout containers were all over the coffee table. I wasn't sure how to maybe begin by explaining why you didn't tell me yourself. "Fix it," she whispered, still standing close to the door. Her eyes nodded. I wanted to drop so many times, but Mom would always twist it. Make it seem as though I was allowing you to control my life or that I was being unappreciative. You mean she made you feel guilty about, she didn't dispute that I should have fought when she shoved me out. Challenging. But she persisted in expressing things that stuck in my mind, like, everyone saw you as the real success story that people pied. I crossed my arms to show that I could accomplish something significant without your assistance, and you interrupted me. Your wedding to demonstrate your independence sounds terrible when you say it that way. She blinked quickly. Wanted to marry this person, and I didn't want any of this lore. Celebrate anything positive, and I briefly considered whether I could maintain harmony, if I could resolve it before it reached this stage, Chloe. That isn't peacekeeping. The words hit her like a slap, and although I saw her quiver, she didn't. That is cowardice. Contrary, I deserve that, she replied softly, and I allowed the silence to fill the room. I could see the kid I used to be again. She was the one who would burrow into my bed after having nightmares and who would imitate that little sister's handwriting was still there, and she used to urge me to brush her hair before school. However, I was currently speaking with a woman who had made a horrible decision. Mom's been doing this our whole lives, I eventually said, and she turns us into against one another, turning everything into a contest. You were the one she always looked up to, so you didn't notice. I never wanted to be the favorite, but Chloe looked at me with hurt and guilt. Tears now streamed down her cheeks as she whispered the number. Yet you never said no either. I apologize for taking so long to forgive her. I needed her to sit through it first, feel the consequences of what she had done, but my voice softened when I eventually spoke. Was organizing that wedding out of love for you, not to gain attention or power, but to give you something. She added, beautiful, something stable, something we didn't get growing up, and I destroyed it. For a few minutes, we sat in stillness, the kind of silence that seems to... She muttered something that shocked me, and I candled the wound as she tried to scab it over. Mom is upset about the bachelorette weekend and the bridal shower, but I told her I was putting everything on hold until I fixed the problem. I simply nodded with you. She still doesn't understand what Chloe added that she believes you overreacted, which is why I nearly laughed. Now that her plans are falling apart, I'm willing to wager that she wants to speak with you. Chloe paused before saying, You embarrassed me that you... I raised an eyebrow and made her appear horrible in front of the family. Yes, she claimed you made her feel ashamed, so I leaned back on you by returning my own money. Chloe wiped her on the couch and shook my head slowly. She accomplished that by herself. Eyes I stared at her for a long time, but I'm not sure where. We're going. However, it takes time to restore trust, so I'll wait, she added. I trusted her, but I was also aware of the long road ahead and the consequences. wasn't finished yet, particularly not with Mom. It took me 3 days to agree to see Mom. I wanted her to stew in the moment, not because I needed time to ponder, since I already knew what I thought. Chloe had kept me informed, and I wanted her to consider whether the silence was permanent. Our mother was bewildered, disheartened, and extremely wounded. The trio of she was unable to see why I had acted so passionately over a simple emotional deception. I had been erased like a smear on a window pane by the simple guest list decision, and now she was. When I eventually agreed to a meeting, I demanded that it take place at my house while acting like it was just a schedule conflict. When you were constantly instructed to maintain harmony in someone else's house, neutral ground wasn't neutral. She came. I opened the door 10 minutes early after watching her via the peephole. Her lips were well pressed in her beige jacket. Mom didn't show up for the assignment, so she painted the same shade of plum that she always wore. Chats I opened the door for her when she arrived for performances. Lauren stated with ease, as though we were reuniting as old friends, and I moved. Aside without a, she glanced at my flat and said, "Nice place, chic." Cut to the. She stared in astonishment at my tone as I stated bluntly, "You didn't come to compliment my throw pillows. You skipped my sister's wedding, so I see that we're avoiding small talk." She let out a sigh and placed her, "I understand. That you're furious, but I put my purse on the table as if she owned the space. Believe that things have gone so out of hand that I crossed my arms. You canceled the venue," she added harshly, "and I'm the one who escalated this. Do you know how it made us appear like Americans?" I about burst out laughing, but she persisted. I shook my head, thinking she was the main character in this mess. "Mom, you told me sternly that I had not been invited to my sister's wedding, even though I had spent 2 years assisting with the planning," and she waved a hand. "Pay for it. You didn't just cross a line." You lit it on fire. Dismissively, you always make everything about you. The location, the schedule, the guest list. I took a picture of Chloe's vision since she desired that location and that visitor. You told her I was stealing her moment and persuaded her to cut me out. Because you were the one who ultimately lost it, everyone was raving about how wonderful you were and how you were paying the tab. It was meant to be Chloe's moment. But you couldn't help but make it about yourself. Like every time I looked at her. Did you hear her? She didn't even flinch. All I could do was sit there feeling the weight of what she had spoken, the anger, and the resentment before realizing this was never about the wedding, I said. Subtly, "You've detested the fact that I'm successful and don't require you." She stiffened her jaw and said, "I've hated it since I moved out and stopped being the appreciative daughter. Some psychological turmoil, and all I've done is help. You two. You helped Chloe, and I helped." She snarled, "You always think you're better than everyone." "Now you think money fixes everything," she said. "Spread the word as though it will win you respect or love, but it doesn't. It only makes." I stared at her, feeling lonely, and my heartbeat became sluggish. Dear Mom, I claimed I gave love freely and didn't need money to buy it. I wanted recognition, but I got betrayal instead. She averted her gaze for the first time. I wasn't sure why I had saved for that wedding for 2 years. I said it wasn't for fame, but I've paid for everything for Chloe, including her groceries and textbooks, since I wanted her to have something special. Never asked for a thank you, but being left out of her wedding was about you, not her. Like a rubber band being strained to its breaking point, our stillness dragged on until her voice finally came. Dumped. I may have been mistaken, but I didn't aim to cause harm. You intended to minimize me. I corrected you. You intended to ensure that I understood my position. She glanced at me, then really looked at me, and for a moment, you're dealing with the repercussions. Second, I noticed something that might have been regret, or simply the knowledge that she couldn't control me. She answered in a low voice, "I don't know," and I assumed that the wedding was still off. Actually, that is up to Jacob and Chloe. But if it occurs, it won't be you. Intended, you've made your point. But I answered, "Life," as she stood smoothing her blazer. Pointed out that I simply stopped tidying up your mess, and she departed without saying farewell. After that, I sat on my couch for a while, my pulse racing, gazing at the room she had taken up, finally free of her. Shadow. I didn't get a text or a call from Mom following that altercation. A forwarded, passive-aggressive email about family, values that was merely silent. And to be honest, it was the calmest week I'd experienced in years, but Chloe kept turning up. By the next Saturday, sitting across from me with handmade muffins that were somehow both sincere and undercooked. Like a child waiting for a decision, "I've been thinking at my kitchen island," she added. Her eyes were heavy from what I assumed. Were many nights of guilt about beginning afresh, and her hands were wrapped around her coffee mug. I waited to tell her about the wedding because I didn't want to break the silence. She needed to know. She added, "How can I sit in discomfort? I want to reschedule it. Small, honest, no drama, no performance, only for those who are important." "Sounds good," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "Who's footing the bill?" She reddened. "Lauren, I don't want your money," she said. I don't mean that as a rejection, but that caught me off guard. "You've sacrificed so much previously, so I want it to be ours this time. And Jacob's, I wanted to start from scratch and create something that was ours." I gave her a serious look because it was the first time I had ever seen my sister in an adult. Not as the woman who had deceived me or as the girl I had always shielded, but as someone in the midst of becoming. "What occurs if Mom pushes back?" I gently inquired, and Chloe didn't flinch. "She has already informed me that she will not attend if we proceed without consulting her." I arched an eyebrow, and she replied, "I'll send her pictures," with a feeble smile. I couldn't help but laugh. For the first time in weeks, Chloe laughed as well, and it felt genuine, unstrained, and compelled a couple of sisters to recreate something that had almost been lost. I added, "I'm proud of you," and she swallowed hard. We spent the next few hours browsing through local venues this time and scribbling ideas on napkins. Affordable ones I didn't offer. And she didn't ask for money because I was harboring resentment. But after realizing that retreating wasn't always an indication of desertion, love too. A few days later, I assumed that Jacob had invited me over. Not Chloe, but just me. Ostensibly about the details of the wedding. But when I got to their apartment, he gave me a tightly folded paper fragment. "What is this?" I scanned it and inquired, "Our new budget." A modest guest list, a backyard potluck-style celebration, a small garden ceremony, and a surprise honeymoon fund, a $5,000 line item. I am aware that it isn't Tuscany but we want to start our marriage with something that's ours. "No strings attached, no guilt," he remarked, referring to a seaside resort. Jacob, who was modest and strangely attractive, gazed at me. I wanted to thank you for handling things so well. I could have blown it all up, but I chose to give him a half-smile instead. "I don't really. You simply revealed what was already damaged, and we toasted, to be honest." He cleared his throat, saying, "We'd like you to understand the boundaries of not losing people we love in order to keep someone else comfortable." He hurried on you to officiate the marriage, so I froze. "But only if you wish to. You've been there for us through everything, not only Chloe's sister Lauren. You believe in love even at its messiest moments. When it's difficult, I try not to cry while looking down at the glass in my hands. I didn't anticipate that, not the gesture, but the confirmation that I was still wanted and seen was just what I needed." I muttered, "Be honored." That night, as I lay in bed, I considered all the ways this story I could have left. allowing the resentment to solidify into silence permanently closed the chapter. And to be honest, nobody would have been held accountable. Me. But I decided to remain in order to observe rather than to enable rescue. Appear when I want them to, because sometimes mending doesn't need going back. It signifies moving forward together. On the wedding morning, the sky was ideal, soft, golden light that is neither too bright nor too cloudy. Seeping through the early spring foliage as if the natural world had chosen to bestow a silent benediction, Chloe and the place Jacob had selected was simple, but lovely. Nestled behind a local bed and breakfast featuring rows of white folding chairs arranged beneath a wooden trellis with growing flowers, I stood off to the side, clutching my scribbled notes and heart under the oak tree canopy. It seemed strangely quiet, even comical after all the drama and mayhem here. We were returned to something so basic and human. Two lovers prepared to construct. Chloe looked stunning in a flowing gown. A life without opulence or spectacle, only honesty. A daisy was placed behind one ear, and her hair was in beautiful curls, in an ivory gown she had fashioned herself after finding second-hand. She smiled slightly when she saw me from the other side of the lawn. It was the same smile she used to give me when she gave me confidential notes in class, filled with anxious anticipation, asking me in a quiet voice, you see? Am I doing this correctly? She smiled as I nodded, deepened. Yes, she was doing things well. Slowly, the people arrived. Roommates from college, pals from work, a few aunts, and cousins. It was as intimate as promised and evident in her absence. Mom, she had fulfilled her promise following weeks of conflict, she whispered.